it is essentially a driver's car. It is essentially one that is made by the aircraft industry to aircraft industry standards. What it looks like from the point of view of function, which is how the early ones were shaped and how the later ones evolved, is tremendously important. The difference in aerodynamic efficiency of these cars, when you compare them with others of the time which looked fashionably streamlined but in fact were about as aerodynamic as a barn door, is down to the fact that these people were aviation industry people who knew what they were doing. And it was made in the same way, and with the same sort of ratio of inspectors to artificers, such as you only get in the aircraft industry. They were beautifully made.
The aeroplane company was formed at the very end of my great-grandfather's life. He was the first Sir George White. And he had spent a lifetime in transport. He had been involved in the founding of the Bristol Tramway and Carriage Company in 1875. He had watched aviation from 1904 onwards, and by 1909 he realized that it was on the point of becoming a useful method of transport. So he founded what was in effect the first serious aircraft factory in England. Many people have come to believe that it was just an amorphous industrial mass, when in fact it was a family company. My father was desperately keen on motor cars, almost from birth, and throughout the 20s and 30s he lent very heavily on his father to persuade him to make cars, and he never quite succeeded in getting him to do that. He'd always wanted to race cars, but his father wouldn't let him, so he took up racing boats instead, with his father's approval, to a degree at least. And in 1938, he took the 4-litre world speed record. War was looming, and aeroplanes needed to be built. That really made him fade out of the boat scene.
The aeroplane company had something like 50,000 people. At the end of the war, there was nothing else for them to do, so they decided, among other things, to make a car. So I appeared right at the beginning. And I became involved with the BRM while I was still in uniform, and Raymond Mays taught me how to be a racing driver. And the first race that was held in Britain was held on an old airfield. I'd had bags of practice on an airfield, and I won the race, the very first post-war race, in this 328 BMW. Little did we all know that that was going to become really the inspiration for the car that you see here now. This car here is the Type 400. We were awarded on war reparations what remained of the BMW factory and all the plans and so on. People say, oh yes, it's a BMW made in England. It certainly wasn't.
I've always liked cars anyway, and I was walking past the showroom one day, and I in fact fell in love and bought a 412, which is one of the modern cars. Then, having really loved that car, I joined this club. I really got fascinated by the Bristol engined cars, and I bought this one about 3 years ago.
This 400 and the 401 are absolutely beautiful looking cars, and it's the look of a car that turns me on first of all. Although it goes very well, it's a very nice car. The thing to me that is amazing, that is the original 1948 colour. I mean, if you can think 1948 was, you know, after the war, everything was miserable and black cars, I would have thought. Now, I didn't believe it was an original colour until I got together with other Bristol owners, and there were 2 or 3 all in the same colour. I think it's just a wonderful looking car.
GMR 11 is a 400 drophead, of which only 2 were made. The chassis number is 3. It was one of the very few cars built by the Bristol Aeroplane Company at its Filton Works during 1946. One of its most distinctive features are the front and rear bumpers, which we usually refer to as the curly type.
They all had the same integrity of design and careful manufacture that has always distinguished the Bristol from, I think, any other make. And anyone who's ever spoken to an ex-Bristol mechanic will realize that this, in many cases, was a labor of love as well as a job. And it is a fact that in some of the departments, the ratio of inspectors to workers was the extraordinary one of 1 to 2.
I was a foreman of the mechanical fit-out. We used to assemble the back axle, front suspension, engine and gearbox in, and road test. That was my side of the job. This is in the main production shop at Filton when we were just phasing out the 400 and bringing in the 401s. And we had a proper production line running. Mr. George White would never allow us, if a car broke down or anything went wrong, it was never allowed to be towed. Either had to come back to the works on its own steam, or we sent a lorry out, a Thornycroft crane. It was lifted onto the flatbed lorry, sheeted down, and brought back to the works. He would not have a Bristol towed.
Even the tiniest ripple in the bodywork or the slightest imperfection of any sort was more than he could bear. And really, after he'd moved on, I suppose, from his childhood love of speed, he went on then to a love of perfection. And it is certainly reflected in the cars they produced during that period, I think.
The 403, from the appearance point of view, looks identical with the 401. In fact, it was, in many ways, very different and much improved, delivering 100 brake horsepower against the 85 brake horsepower of the earlier car.
I'm a panel beater by trade. I worked for a garage who had a contract for repairing Bristol cars in Leeds. So that's where I really fell in love with them many years ago. And then I saw one and bought it and began restoring it, and then I got another one, and then I got this one. This was a 403 Bristol saloon, and I'd always fancied having a go at building a conversion. And so I did grasp the nettle and cut the roof off, which took me about 4.5 years. But it's been well worth it. I enjoyed doing it.
I've got a 404, which was given to me by my father as a 16th birthday present. I used it a very great deal to start with. It was the only car I had, and then I started a business of my own which required an estate car, and I'm sorry to say that I neglected it quite considerably for a while. Really, after my father died, I suppose, I realized what I'd got, and so I had it sorted out, and here it is today.
Bristol had a publicity department, and so whatever was happening in that sphere, anything to do with Bristol engines, the aircraft engines, I covered as well. These are the 405 production runs in the what was the fitting shop in the at Filton. But it's being prepared for the paint shop. The paint shop was down here. It's a pity it's not in color to show you the different colors of the cars that were being turned out there.
My own favorite is the 405 drophead. I had one, kept it for 12 years. I drove it all over Europe, and I well remember on one occasion being surrounded by a group of Italians who said no English designer could possibly design a body as beautiful as this, so it must be Italian. I said, on the contrary, it's made by Bristol Aeroplane Company, who make the Concorde. Later, after the crowd dispersed, a man came up and said, but we in France make the Concorde, so maybe she was designed by someone in France too.
In 1952, Along came Cooper and they said, we would like to put an engine in a car. This is a Cooper Bristol, and it got instant success with Mike Hawthorne, who drove Cooper Bristol at Goodwood in 1952, and he was faster than most of the bigger Grand Prix cars. We introduced a car called the 450, and that car was a Bristol engine, which gave a great deal of horsepower, and that car looked very slippery and wonderful, but when it got to Le Mans, it was found that the car was overheating and so on, so all sorts of holes had to be cut in it. We decided that those cars should be open cars because, in fact, they'd be easier to drive and also probably really just as aerodynamically efficient. So we redesigned the cars, we rebodied them. We only made three altogether, all the time. So the last cars, which competed at Le Mans in 1955, they were open two-seaters. And once again, we had 3 cars running.
The entry was as fully representative of the sports cars of the world as in any previous race. The nationalities of cars and drivers together adding up to nothing short of a United Nations of motor racing. This race is to last for 24 hours, and these are but the opening minutes. At the Bristol pit, there is some closing stage anxiety. The cars are aiming to finish once again 1, 2, 3 in the 2-litre class, but are being harried by the 1500cc Porsches. The question is, will the Bristols accept the challenge or ignore it to make sure of the class award?
And we won the 2-litre class, first, second and third, so it was a case of complete reliability.
It's a Bristol 406, 1959. There isn't another car made as well as this one's made. Solid chassis under it, an aluminium bodywork on a steel frame, and beautiful workmanship, which isn't shown to its best in my car. There are others much better here, but it's a car that'll put up with an owner like me for 21 years, must be well made.
64 Fay is a Type 406 that remains, to my mind, quite the nicest of the Bristols for those who prefer something not too sporty.
This particular car, it was on the 1960 Earl's Court show stand as a unique exercise. The chassis, engine and all the mechanical parts are standard Bristol, actually Type 406, except the chassis is slightly shorter. And Mr. Crook had this chassis sent to Milan, where Zagato produced this body as really as a styling exercise. One assumes with the hope that they may be going to production. Like many other people, I was very excited by it, and as all we car enthusiasts do, I dreamt that one day I might own it, little thinking that I would. It's unique in every respect. Unfortunately, it never went into production, and I've had it 20 some odd years. I'm not quite sure how many. So long ago, I've almost forgotten.
The government was leaning on the large aircraft manufacturers of the time to come together and to join up. And in doing so, the Bristol Car Company effectively got squeezed out. The link between the Bristol Aeroplane Company and Armstrong Siddeley really did for it, I think. And I remember my father saying that the Armstrong Siddeley side were very keen to mass-produce Bristols of lesser quality, and he just wasn't prepared to do that. He wanted to make proper cars, and so he preferred to break away and do it himself than to do what they wanted.
Mr. Crook and Sir George White were the sole proprietors. It was a private company, not even limited. And they carried on like a couple of very superior tailors. You know, you could go to them and ask them for a motor car, and you could have a motor car, and you could have it more or less as you wanted, within certain specific limits which they wouldn't transcend. But if you wanted a racing engine in your road-going saloon, you could have it. And even today, if you have a car that was made then, the chances are that they'll use some of the same machinery, possibly some even of the same people.
I started in 1946. I was transferred from aircraft. They said they were starting a car division. Well, I'd go there and start their cost department. And I was only too pleased to do that. After about 3 years, I went across then to spares. Most manufacturers, of course, they only keep spares going for 10 years, where we've got spares and we can maintain and overall the engines back to 1946. I actually bought a 400 because I got so fed up with people asking me how you do this, how you do that, and actually rebuilt it. Took me 3 years to do it, but I then knew all the answers for the customers when they came on the phone.
In around the end of '59, we had our own engine being made, which was a twin overhead camshaft, 3.8-litre engine, very lightweight. We were going to put that in the car, but then we decided to go to an even larger engine because the cars were getting slightly larger. People wanted more accommodation, so on, inside. So we cooperated with Chrysler, and we put originally a 5.2 engine, which of course doubled the acceleration and everything else. The press described it in glowing terms: rocket age performance with drawing room comfort. Which I thought was rather good.
They were just finishing the 407s when I started there. I was on aircraft, over at Filton, and the foreman, actually, who's on the photograph there, bending over with the white coat on, was retiring, and so I went over there, and that's how it started. If a customer wanted a particular color, then they could have it, you know. Because it wasn't a production car, each car was built individually, there was no problem with that. That is the complete production team, apart from one person. Two of them are still actually there now. This is Eddie Holder, that one, and Sid Lovesey. That's a 408. You can't see the side stripes on it, but it was a 408.
To me, as someone who does my own maintenance, they're remarkably well built, and once you've done a job, it stays done. My father was quite an enthusiast. He had a 403 and then a 405 and then a 406, and I very much grew up with them. This one I've just stopped using because the insurance has become prohibitive, but I was doing 20,000 miles in them for the last 5 years, I think. So using it regularly.
The 411 was in production for an extremely long period, from 1969 until 1975, during which time went through no less than 5 different mocks. All had subtle differences, some in styling, others in engine capacity.
Well, it was a big blow for the company in '69, and I heard that George White had a bad car accident. Unfortunately, he never came into the company again, and so I ran it really single-handed by remote control up to '73, when I acquired all his holdings then.
When my father retired, he did so because of ill health. He'd had the most appalling car accident, ironically, I suppose, in a Bristol. He remained as senior partner for 4 years or so, but found that he just wasn't able to go back to work. And certainly I have a letter here which the staff wrote to him on his retirement. It's not enough to say that you'll be missed. Your relations with your staff did more than breed loyalty. They engendered a personal affection which is not often present in business these days. And I think you really can't have a nicer letter than that.
The 412 didn't immediately supersede the 411 Series 5, but was available for about a year in parallel production. But its appearance was so radically different to the rather svelte, smooth outlines of the 411 that it gained the nickname of Flying Brick, which belied its performance.
We had the number 400 to start with allocated as a block from the airplane company. And we're often asked why we changed those to names. Well, all these other manufacturers started to have numbers, and it got really, from our point of view, slightly common. So we decided to use the names of all our famous aircraft. And thus we had the Britannia, the Brigand, the Beaufighter, and now this, the latest Blenheim.
The car is still built on the basis of it being essentially a driver's car, but it will always be dignified. It will always look sober. It's rather like a good suit in that you don't notice the suit on the chap who's wearing it. You notice that the chap is well dressed, but you couldn't remember the fine detail. And the cars are really rather like that. A limited future in terms of quantities, but good things don't necessarily have to come in large numbers. And when you go seeking large numbers, you frequently come unstuck and start having to corrupt your standards. This was a lesson that Bristol's learned a good long time ago when one of their rivals, who were making, at the time, I think, 15 cars a week, one week, because things were going badly, they didn't sell any, which meant the next week they had to sell 30. And before very long, they had a field full of unsold motor cars, which eventually they could only get rid of by dropping the price on everything by £1,000, which was a sixth in those days. And Bristol learned their lesson from that and carried on with their resolve never to make more than 3 a week in any circumstances.
I think that it will survive because it is so different that for a person who has money and who finds that the ordinary quality cars, no names, no pack drill, the Bristol does epitomise exclusiveness as well as quality, and it is an interesting fact that Mr. Crook of Bristol Cars safeguards the identity of his customers as well as a good solicitor does their clients.
Our production, actually, of motor cars all over the years, we've really never been over 3 a week. This is the latest Blenheim. Of course, we're not making 3 a week now, but I expect we will get up to that number, but no more.